Okay, I see a chest over there. I go over there and check it out. Hey, there's a chest. E, locked, needs gold key. I'm gonna press E. Oh, it doesn't do anything. Okay, well, I seen some keys over here. Get the key. I'm going to open my inventory. And I got 2 keys now. I'm going to go over to the chest, and I'm going to open the chest. And one of the keys disappears. And then I can get the mushroom. I can also shift-click and move things over to the chest if I want to use this as a temporary storage. Okay, I told you last time that I would show you how to add sound effects to the inventory. And that's just the first part of what we're going to do today. But what we need to do first is update the Player Manager script. So I'm going to open the Player Manager script. I'm going to update it with my changes. Okay, here we go. We already have get gem, spin gem, and fail gem sounds, but I've added an add item sound and a pick up item sound, and also some other sounds. Add item is when you pick up an item from the world, or it's added automatically to your inventory without you dragging it in. Pick up item is when you're picking it up from the inventory, and drop in item sound is when you drop it back down in the inventory. Drop out item sound is when you drop it out into the 3D world. And I've also added a couple more open chest sound and close chest sound. The rest of the script is also updated with just some methods for playing those sounds. Okay, I'm going to save this, and then we're going to go back to the Unity editor. Okay, in the editor, we're going to go to the Player Manager in the hierarchy, and we can see our new sounds. I'm going to drag this up by the player character. So we have, 6 new sounds that we can add. So let's go in the project to LewyT. Where is LewyT? So the menu one has unequip, which I think is a pretty good sound, specifically for like moving stuff around in your inventory. So whenever you select any kind of media file in the project, down here at the bottom of the inspector, you can either this will be open and you'll have a player here, or you can click on this and it will be open. And you can just click the little play button and you can hear that sound. Unequip. That's a, kind of a soft shuffle noise. I'm going to go back to Player Manager. So sometimes when you're clicking around between the project and the inspector and the hierarchy, every time you click a different thing, either whether it's in the project or the hierarchy, it changes what shows in the inspector. And you might accidentally change it, and then you have to go back to the one you were just on. So here's a little quick tip. Once you get to the place where you want to stay, you can click on this little lock icon up in the top right of the inspector, this right hand panel. It will lock it, and then you can click on other stuff and it won't change over there. Now it also doesn't show you the media controls, but I just wanted you to know how to do that. There's lots of times when it's handy. In the UI movement folder, I like the unequip sound for add item. That's when you pick up an item in the world that goes into your inventory. And then the movement folder, you have step grass. That's good for pickup item. 45 landing is good for drop in item. And then back in the buffs heals folder, there's debuff, which I think is good for drop out item. Now these are just my opinions on these sounds versus what I use them for. You're welcome to use your own judgment and pick whatever you want. In fact, there are some other sounds that you can get from the Unity Asset Store. I'm going to get some more sounds. This LewyT doesn't have anything that I really think sounds right for opening and closing a chest. So we're going to do that also. So let's go find that in the Unity Asset Store. Okay, this latches, mechanical locking and unlocking sound effects pack is actually a lot of cool sounds for the kind of stuff that we're actually wanting to do next. Thank you, Shashiraj Productions. I will include a link to this in the description of this video. Now, while we're in the Unity Asset Store, I'm going to take you over to this other thing. For the chest, I'm going to download this asset, and it is called Low Poly Casual Chest Free by Aztec Games. Thank you, Aztec Games. I will also include that link in the description. Now, when you're importing the sound effects into your Unity editor, there is a lot of sound effects. I will tell you later which specific files I'm using, but you're welcome to take them all or just the ones that I'm talking about. I'm just going to import them all so I don't have to think about it right now, and then we'll look at them later. Okay, I'm going to uncheck this so lock so we can go listen to some sound effects. The folder project for this is latches, mechanical locking, etc., wave, and there's all these files are in different kilohertz. I'm just going to pick the lowest one. They sound pretty good to me. If you click on one, and if you haven't opened this, you can open it, but you've got this little preview section of the inspector. Click on the play button to hear the sound. If you want it to autoplay as soon as you select it, there's this other button in between the play button and the loop button. So whenever you select a new sound, it just plays it immediately. And you then use the arrow keys and you just go down and listen to each file consecutively. You don't have to open each file in a separate sound player. There's a lot of files in here. The ones that I like specifically for the chest sounds are 248 for opening and 254 for closing. Now, you might find something you like even better. You're welcome to browse through this huge library of sounds and find something that's just perfect for your game. Now let's go back to Player Manager. I'm going to lock this so I don't accidentally change it again. So 248 for open chest sound and 254 for closed chest sound. Okay, now in order to get the sound effects working, we need to update the inventory grid script. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and save it. Now, I've made lots of changes. This includes the chest stuff also. Okay, we've got some errors because my changes to the inventory grid script reference another script called Container, which it hasn't been included yet. So I'm going to go ahead and create that one also. In the scripts folder, just right click anywhere, create, scripting. I think it's just a mono behavior script. I'm going to call it Container. Open up the container. It is default. And I'm going to copy in my changes, or my actual container script file. Save that. In the inventory panel, we need a reference to the player manager. So close this again. Inventory grid. It has player manager and it's none because we haven't dragged it in. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that in. Pick up. Okay, did you hear that? I'm going to pick up these keys. Mushroom. Makes a sound every time I pick one up. Now, if I go to the inventory, I can move them around. I pick one out of the inventory, and it makes that noise. I place it back, and it's that noise. It's kind of satisfying if you ask me. Now, low poly casual chests. I want to import that into our project. It also has a lot of stuff in it because there's several different chests. A lot of them look similar to each other. There's just one in particular that I really like. I'm going to import that. And you'll find it in Aztec Games. Casual chests free. I'm going to go to prefabs. And these are the different prefabs. Let me go back to my scene and double click on one of them and see what it looks like. Now, it's got the weird pink texture issue, and just a refresher how we fix that. This there's two materials. There's the wood and there's the metal. For the wood, I'm going to change it to Universal Render Pipeline Lit. And if I click on it, now I can actually change the color. It's got the emission as brown, which I think that doesn't make sense. I think it should be like the base color should be kind of a brown. So brown is really orange, only dark orange. Okay. That looks basically like wood. And then I'll close that one and open metal material. And also Universal Render Pipeline Lit. Base map, I want to make it more of a copper color, so it's also orange. And then in the metallic section, I'm going to turn that up, and then the smoothness up also, so it's much more metallic looking. Okay, that's pretty good. Now the hinges are still pink, bright pink. So I'm going to go and click on this item. It's like a child item of the main object, and it has a material. I'm also going to change to Universal Render Pipeline Lit. And it looks like those hinges are kind of a goldish color. I'm going to turn off emission. Emission is like glowing. Anyway, you can tweak these settings to get yours to look the way you want it. I also feel like back up here, this the metal section shouldn't be emissive or glowing, so turn that off, and yeah, it looks much more like a regular metal chest or metal pieces on a chest. I might make it off a little bit lighter color, just not glowing. Okay, so we can rotate around this thing and take a look at it. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to go back to the regular hierarchy and drag in one of these chests. And I think it was that top one that I liked. I'm just going to go over here in the corner somewhere and drop this chest on the ground. It is huge and facing the wrong direction. So I'm going to click on the rotate widget and rotate it around. And then I'm just going to move it down so that it's kind of looks at least like it's kind of sitting on the ground. Scale it from the center down so it looks like a reasonable sized chest for our little slime to be able to find. You can position yours just however you want. Now remember, we need this to be an interactable. We want to be able to walk up to this chest, press E, and open it. So we're going to add a sphere collider. So, sphere collider, and we want the sphere collider to be plenty big, so we'll make it like 5. Now, it's big enough. You can get close to the chest and open it. It needs to be a trigger so that it doesn't block our movement, but we can still open the chest. Okay, we also want a script on this, and that's the container script. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Container is an IInteractable. I'm going to go back to my inventory, and there's this inventory item UI prefab. I'm going to drag into this inventory item UI item prefab slot. It also has a storage folder. I'm going to go ahead and right click on my chest in the hierarchy and create an empty. That will just be a child object, and we'll just call it storage folder. Go back up to the main chest object and drag in the storage folder into the storage folder slot. If we want this to be a locked chest, we can check mark the locked. And we want to, if it's locked, then we definitely need to have a key that will fit it. Well, we do happen to have some keys. This key data is what we want to slide into that required key slot. There's the starting items. Now, starting items it's like the things that are in the chest, but we don't have access to the like in-game runtime UI to place them in this chest before we actually start the game. So we can specify where they will be. So we can just add an item, we expand it. This is asking for inventory item data. So we'll go ahead and drag the mushroom data in there. And we can specify what X and Y position it's at, but 0, 0 is just fine. It's just going to be in the top left corner. There is one more thing. This is optional if whenever you open the chest, if you want it to actually physically, visibly open, then we'll want to do something with this animator. Right now, the animator has a default behavior of it just opens and then closes, just continuously open and close, open and close. And if we go here and double click on this animator, we can open up the animator. I'm going to zoom and pan around so we can see everything. Let's just move everything kind of close together so we can zoom in and you can still read all the words. So it's very simple. By default, it goes to open and then it goes to close. These transitions go back and forth and there's nothing that stops them except for it has exit time of 2 seconds. So it opens and stays there for 2 seconds and then closes and stays there for 2 seconds. That's not the behavior we want. We need a parameter. So in the parameter section, we're going to create a parameter and it's going to be a bool because it's either open or close. We name the bool is open, lowercase is, capital O-P-N. And by default, it is not open because when you get to the chest the first time, it's going to be closed. Now, the entry automatically goes to open. We want to change that. We're going to right-click on close and say set as the default state. So entry will go straight to close this time. It would continue to animate and open and close, except that when we want to click on these transitions, we're going to turn off has exit time. And that means it won't automatically exit the state whenever it runs out of time. We're going to add a condition. And the condition is just looking at the parameters. And we want to say we go from closed to open when is open is true. Now we need to go the other way. When it's open and we want it to close, we want to add add a condition that says when is open is false. We want to make sure that we uncheck has exit time. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is setting up the actual panel for displaying the contents of the chest. I'm going to go to the inventory panel. I'm going to make it visible, and then I'm going to Control-D duplicate it. I'm going to align it, Alt-Shift to the left-hand side of the screen. We'll go in here and change the title text to call it container. Or you can change it to chest, whatever you want to do. Now, I don't like it being the exact same color as the inventory, so I'm back at the top level, the panel. I'm going to change this color to brown, I guess orange, but darker. Now, that doesn't change the grid space image. That was also just a green color. So I'm going to go to the grid space and add like a color overlay to it. So right now it's defaulting to white. So I'm going to go to orange and try to make it kind of brownish. It's a little tricky making green into brown because they're not very close to colors. But anyway, we can just make it so that it's not as green. Now back at the top level inventory panel, I'm going to rename it here. Also, we're going to call it container panel. Some of the new changes to our inventory grid is these checkboxes here. We can say this is the player inventory or it's the chest. And I'm going to click on is the chest. And I'm going to go to the other one, the inventory, and click on is player inventory. Go back to the container. Now we don't need a special button just to open the chest. Like we don't need a C button for chest or anything like that, because we're only going to open the chest when we activate it or interact with it in the world. And we only need to close the chest whenever we're done putting stuff in our inventory. So we will use the inventory action to close the chest, and also we can just walk away from it and it will auto close. Now, because we have two kind of inventory-like objects in our hierarchy, we need to be able to tell them apart, and so we've got these checkboxes. But the player itself, before the inventory is even open, the player needs to know what its inventory is. So we got the player character script, and we need to update that. So let's go to player character, going to update the player character script. We'll talk about the changes later. The inventory item 3D has a reference to player character, and it's set automatically in the interact. So whenever we try to interact with a 3D object in the world that is an inventory item, then it will find the player character that's the only one in the world, and it applies that to get the inventory that is the player's inventory. Now let's go look at the container script. So this is the new script. It is a model behavior IInteractable. So this is going to be applied to the chest. It has a starting item struct, which is just the item data and the X and Y position. It has width and height. That's the grid size that it will have. And then the starting items list is a list of those starting item structs. It has a reference to the UI item prefab, which is the same as the prefab we use for the inventory. It has contents. This is the actual contents of the grid. It's a two-dimensional array. It's got a storage folder. I want to explain a little bit about what this is. Whenever the chest is closed, this is where those UI items go when they're not in the UI inventory, like chest panel. So you can imagine that there would be more than one chest in the world, but you don't need to have a separate user interface panel for each chest. So we just have one container panel, but each of these chests could have different items. And so in order for them not to get mixed up with each other, each chest has a storage folder. So when the chest is closed, those items go back into the storage folder. And when we open a new chest, it pulls the items out of the storage folder, or the starting items, whichever, if it hasn't been opened before. We have a Boolean is locked, and then if it's locked, then it would surely require a key. We have set open animation. That's what will make the animation of the chest work. We have initialize container, and what that does is it checks if it's already initialized, and if so, it just returns out of this method. It sets the contents to, instead of just being a blank two-dimensional array, it actually gives the 2 dimensions of the array, width and height. And then it loops through all the starting items and populates them, instantiates those prefabs, and does all the stuff that you would normally do for a UI item. Set it up, set it active, and for loop through the locations in the grid and place it in the spots that it occupies. And then we're going to set initialize to true, so the next time initialize container runs, it'll say we've already done this part, so we don't have to do it again. Get interact text, because it is a IInteractable. If it's locked, that text is going to say locked needs, and then it'll have the name of the key item that it's looking for. Otherwise, it will just say, press E to open, and then the name of the chest or the container. The transform is the same as our other transform calls. And then our interact method first checks if it's locked, and if it's locked, then it looks up the key that it needs, and it checks if the item. So this check item and default remove is from the player's inventory. The inventory grid that belongs to the player has a method on it, check item and default remove, and you can specify the key. It's looking for whether or not you have that key in your inventory. And if you do, it will be true on this if statement. And by default, this method also will remove that item from your inventory. So it's like it's using up the key. A lot of games are like that. And of course, the chest remains open or at least unlocked after that. If you don't have enough keys to open all the chests, then you need to go find more keys. So whenever we're looking to see if we have the key, if we do have it, we say the is locked is false. So that means we're unlocking the chest, and that's basically all we do. But if we don't have the key, we just do nothing. We don't set the is locked to false. Just return without doing that. Now, if it wasn't locked at all anyway, even if it was locked but we unlocked it, we will get down to this line because we won't return. When we get here, we initialize the container. We covered that already. And then we open the container. And this open container on the inventory grid, it will open it in the container panel. So it'll basically populate that inventory, but it's on the left-hand side. And then we're going to also set the open animation to true. And that's where we have the set open animation. It basically sets that Boolean. Okay, I said I would go over this player character script. A few changes here. The main thing is I made a new method called check for interactable. It does the find best interactable, and then it does some code that checks if we've moved further away from a chest that we have open than is our normal interact distance, and if we've moved away from it, then it closes the chest automatically. And instead of doing the update, so we were previously doing the find interactable on update, and so that means it would run all these checks on the trigger collider every frame, but instead of doing that, we're on the awake method, we're going to invoke repeating, and this is a new kind of method. So basically it will call the check interactables method every third of a second. So this is, I just arbitrarily chose like 3 times a second should be enough. It doesn't need to be 30 times a second, which is your typical frame rate when you're playing a game. And if you're doing that much calculations during each frame, they can actually slow down your frame rate. So this should be a performance improvement on our game. Let's see if there's anything else changed. On enable, quest open close, inventory open close, on disable, on interact, find best interactable. Yep, I think that was the main change. Now the biggest change is our inventory grid script. This has got changes all through it. It was already a long script and now it's even longer. So I'm just going to go through the whole thing and point out changes. Now there is some hover grid stuff. So this is whenever our mouse enters a particular inventory grid, it sets this hover grid to whichever one it enters, and it removes it when it exits. Now the syntax static, it means that this variable belongs to the class itself, not the instances of the class. So when we make, we've got 2 grids right now, and they're both of type inventory grid, but these variables that are marked static don't belong to those individual grids. They belong to the class that is like the ancestor of those grids. And so that's what we're looking at here. We've got the carried UI is a static variable. So there's only one carried UI between both grids. You don't have one thing that you pick up in the inventory and another thing that you pick up independently in the chest. You're just carrying one thing between the two of them. And this hover grid, it also tells you like which specific inventory grid we've got our mouse currently over. We also have a static variables of player instance and chest instance. So that is how how we keep track of which grid is the player's inventory and which is the container. And these are kept track of by the parent ancestor class and not the instances of that class. And then there's the check marks where we can set, is this a player inventory or is this the chest? And then when on the awake method, we are setting the player instance and the chest instance, whichever one this runs on. So both will be set. And what we're going to do is, before we hit play mode, these instances are going to be open. Then we're going to, because we need them to be open to run the awake method, they need to be active to run the awake method. Both inventory and chest container user interfaces will be active so that this awake method will run, and we will set these player instance to the inventory and the chest instance to the container grid. And then we're just going to set them both to inactive. Now we only have one set active false, but this will run on both panels. Try add item was already there. Can place item, I believe, is unchanged. Add item to inventory has some changes. We are now playing the item sound, add item sound whenever we pick up an item from the 3D world. Now, in our on pointer down, we have some changes. Here's something that changed. Set as last sibling. So this is on the inventory grid or the container grid. You could run on both of them. And we're going to set, whenever we click on it, we want the one that we clicked on to be in front of the other one so that we can drag items from one to the other. So its children will be in front of the other grid. So we're setting it as last sibling. However, that will also make it in front of the little I and the Q buttons for opening and closing the inventory and quest panels. So we're going to then, after we've set it to the very front, then we're going to move it back 2 spots. Set sibling index, get in sibling index -2. Okay, I think the next change is over here. So if we want to move items between the 2 grids, we can click and drag them over, but we also want to be able to shift click, and this will check if the shift key is pressed while a carried U item is not selected already. So if it's not already, we're not dropping an item, we're actually trying to pick one up. If we hold shift and click on an item, it will automatically move or transfer the item to the other grid. That will actually return, and we won't do anything else in this method. Drop item to world method itself has one small change. We're going to play that drop out item sound. So whenever we right click and drop an item, it will make a specific sound. The next change is down here, 154, around this area. In the pickup item method, we're going to play the pickup item sound. Also, I want to change the color of the open close button for the inventory to back to dark green when we actually pick up an item in the inventory. So this is when we're clicking on the inventory and we picked up an item out of it. That counts as like acknowledging the alert that was a yellow button. Okay, the place item has a few changes. So whenever we place an item, we might be placing the item from having picked it up from another grid. So we want to make sure we set the parent of the item we're placing in the grid to be the grid that we're placing it on or in. We also need to set the local scale and local rotation to make sure that they are back to nothing, to normal. And this rotation is important. If you've rotated your chest to make it look normal, like so you can see the front of the chest instead of the back, or whichever way you need to turn it, and you pick up an item that was in that chest, it is rotated relative to the new chest that you're putting it in, and so it might look really backwards or funny. So this is where we reset it so that it doesn't look strange. We're also going to play the drop in item sound when we place an item in a container or the inventory. The next thing is this open close inventory panel has some new logic. Instead of just doing the color, changing the color of the button and then setting it as active or inactive, this is the smart close. For closing the inventory, we also want to close the chest. So that's how we close that. The chest panel is by closing the inventory. And so that is what this part does. Chest instance.close container. Okay, and then transfer item is also a new method. This is when we shift click an item, we can transfer it to the other panel. So if we shift click in the inventory, it goes to the chest. If we shift click in the chest, it will go to the inventory. And this is the logic to do that. So we're using the target grid.try add item from transfer, and then we clear the references in the grid we're transferring from. Try add item from transfer is also a new method. We're just looping through the width and the height, and we're trying to place the item at a particular position. And if we can, then we do, and we have to set the parent of the item to the new grid. We need to set the scale to the normal size in case like your parent is a different scale, and we got to set the position of X and Y in that new inventory grid. And we're also going to play this add item sound. Okay, open container is also a new method. This is assuming that this is running on the container grid as opposed to the inventory grid. When this container is opened, first we check to see if this is the source container. If it is, we don't need to do anything. We're not really going to open the container. So we're going to return. But if our current container is not null, meaning that we already have a container open, but we're trying to open another one, first we're going to close the container that's already open, and then we'll do the logic to open this new container. And we're going to go ahead and play that open chest sound. We're going to set the current container to the source, and so that next time if you hit open container again on the same container, it ignores that and just returns and doesn't try to do all the logic again when it's already open. It says this grid is going to be equal to the source contents. So that is transferring the contents of the container to the container grid. And then we're going to make sure we set this object as active. That's going to be the container grid. We're going to make sure it's visible. We're going to do the open close inventory panel. So if we're opening a container, we're also going to open the inventory. That's what that means. It seems like it wouldn't make much sense to have a container open on the left-hand side. You can move stuff around in the container, but you don't have the inventory open. So I'm just going to make it open the inventory also so that you can then transfer stuff over. And then we're looping through all of the width and height. We're setting the parent. We're setting the scale and the rotation to make sure that's normal. Getting the rect transform and setting the position of the rect transform of the item. These are the UI items. We're setting their positions, and we're going to set them each item we're going to set as active so it's visible, and we're setting the position in the grid. And then close container is also a new method. So if the current container is already null, that means it's already closed. We don't need to run close, and so we return. If we didn't do that, then we'll go ahead and play the close chest sound because we really are closing a chest. And then we're going to set the open animation to false, which means it does the close animation. And then we're looping through the width and height, and we're setting the items to inactive, active equals false. And then we're changing the parent of those individual items so they're no longer going to be displayed on the grid, because if you close one container, you might open another one, and so you don't want the items from one container to be in another container. So we're going to move each of those items to the storage folder, and that's this other object that we added to the chest. And then once we're done with all that, we're going to set the current container to null, and we're going to set the game object, and that is the grid itself. That's going to be the container grid. We're going to set it inactive so that it's hidden because we closed the container. Now this check item and default remove is also a new method. This is going through the grid of the inventory. It's looking for any item that matches the data that we pass into it. And we're going to say, oh, we're going to remove it. By default, we're going to remove it true, but we're looping through and we're looking for that item, checking to see if each item has the actual data that matches the data that we're looking for. And if we find one, the first one we find, we will remove it if the remove if found is true, which by default it is. And so that's what happens when we use a key to open a chest. It removes the key. So then to remove that key or wherever the item is, we're going to identify that item. We're going to clear the grid references of that item. We're going to destroy the UI item that is representing that item. And then when we're done with that, because we found it and we may have removed it, we return true out of this check item and default remove. But if we get through everything and we didn't even find it, we will return false. Okay, that's the inventory grid script. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I think that's all the scripts. Okay, one thing that we need to do so that this will work completely the way we expect is the inventory item UI prefab needs to have blocks recast turned off so that we can click on an item and move it to another grid and drop it so that it doesn't block the raycast to the new grid. Now let's go ahead and run our game. I'm going to go ahead and maximize. Okay, I see a chest over there. I'm going to go over there and check it out. Hey, that's a chest. E, locked, needs gold key. I'm going to press E. It doesn't do anything. Okay, well, I seen some keys over here first, so let's get one of these. I picked up a key. I go back over to the chest. Press E, and there you go. It opens the chest. And what's in the chest? A mushroom. I'm going to click on that mushroom and put it over here. Oh, by the way, I noticed my key is not here. It must have been used up whenever I opened the chest. I can also shift click and move it in one fell swoop from one grid to the other. Now, if I close the inventory, it also closes the chest. And when the chest interface closes, it also closes the 3D object chest. Okay, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to run through that again. I'm going to get the key. I'm going to open my inventory. And I got 2 keys now. I'm going to go over to the chest, and I'm going to open the chest. And one of the keys disappears. And then I can get the mushroom. I can also shift click and move things over to the chest if I want to use this as a temporary storage. Okay, thank you for watching LewyT Amusement Academy Part 17. Next time, we will use this inventory grid system and implement a NPC store where we can buy and sell items.